Good evening.
Good evening. It's good to see so many familiar faces, and more than that, smiling at me. Thank you. My name is Ursula Gomez-Ellis, and I welcome you here at Given Highland Farms. And I'd like to start this evening by reflecting on what brought us here today. During the last 2.5 years with COVID, we and the world have been living through a traumatic time. In America, the pandemic has taken already over 1 million lives, and we are not done yet. Many of those have been dying in isolation, without the comfort of loved ones and the opportunity to say goodbye. Forced isolation robbed us of being able to support each other. Depression was and still is a common experience. Considering our own mortality, a common reaction. In May, articles published in our Given Highland Farms newsletter, the highlights, and the publication of Melanie McDuff's book, Our Last Best Act, Planning for the End of Our Lives to Protect the People and the Places We Love, contributed to an increased interest in alternatives to conventional end-of-life customs. Cassie Barrett, Director of Cemetery Operations at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary in Mills River, will talk about green burials and home funerals. Welcome, Cassie. Sarah Laswell, the owner of Moss and Sizzle Farm, Natural Casket Company near Lake Lure, will talk about environmentally friendly caskets and working with local casket weavers. Welcome. We will finish with a slide presentation of the making of our tray. In order to go through the process and the presentation, we ask you to hold your question and bring them to us when we share refreshments later. You're on, Cassie.
Okay. So I think it's important before we talk about green burial to kind of start with where we are today. So how did we get where we are today? You can see this family, this casket's kind of hovering. We've all been to a funeral. We've seen a funeral like this. There was a time, a long time in our history, where it was the families who took care of their own after they died. Often the women were the ones to clean the body, or often the men that would make the casket, or maybe a local cabinet maker would make the casket. People from the community would gather, they would dig the grave. And it was a community affair, it was a family affair. The body would be laid out in the parlor, people could come by the house, say goodbye. And the burial itself was a very simple affair, out in nature, sometimes on the farm, your local graveyard or cemetery. There were no burial vaults, there were no burial liners, there was no embalming. This is the way it was for a very, very long time. And then at some point, we started using embalming. So the way that embalming came to be was because of the Civil War. So during the Civil War, soldiers would die. They would die all over the country, and they'd have to be shipped back to their families via train. You can imagine what would happen to bodies in a train if the weather was hot. At the time, embalming was used in medical practices only. But the public thought it was very weird and very macabre. No one embraced it. They thought it was very, very strange. But for practical purposes, during the Civil War, they had to start doing embalming. But what really made the public accept it was when Abraham Lincoln died, he was embalmed because they purposely wanted to do a trip around the country so that people could say goodbye to him. And this legitimized it because, of course, he was a very revered president. And then the American public, they embraced embalming. Fast forward, and what we have today is both the medical industry and the funeral industry, two things that have really removed us from death. We now look at death as a medical event. It often happens in a hospital setting, but it is not a medical event. But that's how we treat it. And we now have funeral directors and these people who we hire to do everything for us. And so death is no longer a part of our life, when it was for so long such a normal, natural part of our life. And this has led to what we have today, which is the conventional burial. Again, a burial that almost all of us, if not all of us, have experienced. There's astroturf, there's a casket kind of, hovering above the ground, such as this. And conventional burial, as I'm sure you're aware, is very expensive. So the median cost of burial in the United States is between $9,000 and $12,000, and goes up from there. I mean, you can get a casket that is tens and thousands, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 just on a casket if you wanted to. Also, with a conventional burial, you may end up using products you don't need. So we're so used to embalming that we think we have to be embalmed, where, as a matter of fact, it is not legally required in any state. You are not legally required to be embalmed. There are some funeral homes that if you want to have a public viewing, they require it. They say, if you want to be laid out in my parlor or my chapel, you have to be embalmed, but it's actually not required. You are going to have these elaborate caskets that people are going to see for how many minutes? So you may end up being sold in a time of grief products that you don't need and spending a lot of money that you don't need to spend. And sometimes, and not always, but in a conventional funeral setting, it can sometimes be very impersonal. I mean, you've probably experienced this. It's just sometimes can feel removed, it can feel a little sterile, it can feel a little cold, very formulaic, this is what we do. And the other thing about conventional burial is it is harmful to the environment. So each year, conventional funeral and burial practices, and this is just in the United States, consume 77,000 native hardwood and tropical trees for caskets, use 1 million tons of reinforced concrete for vaults. That's enough concrete to create a 2-lane highway stretching from San Francisco to Kansas City. That's a year. Use 7.3 million gallons of embalming fluid containing the carcinogen formaldehyde. That's enough to fill 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And use 17,000 tons of copper and bronze and 64,500 tons of steel. So all of that's being mined, all of that's being resourced. That's 1 year. To put that kind of in a more local perspective, a 10-acre cemetery, we're just a little bit over 11 acres. A typical 10-acre cemetery, and again, this is just over the span, uses enough coffin wood to construct 40 houses, nearly 1,000 tons of casket steel, 20,000 tons of vault concrete, and enough toxic carcinogenic embalming fluid to fill a backyard swimming pool. That's just 10 acres. And this is what we're looking at now underneath the ground. So burial vaults and liners, probably a lot of you know. Most cemeteries, it's either made out of concrete or steel, and it goes into the ground before the casket goes. The reason they do that is, as you know, most cemeteries that have these perfectly manicured lawns, they don't want the ground to sink in. But it's using a lot of resources. This is what is underneath the ground at a typical cemetery. This is what you'd be looking at. And so a lot of times people think, well, what about cremation? Maybe that's a better choice. Well, the thing about cremation is, unfortunately, it's not so great for the environment either. So one cremation, basically you're having to heat up what they call the retort up to 1900 degrees Fahrenheit for over 2 hours. That's a tremendous amount of fuel. In that process, if anybody has mercury fillings, you remember how we used to do mercury fillings? That turns into mercury gas, which goes into the atmosphere and comes back down into the water table. This produces 250 to 350 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions annually in the United States. Byproducts include nitrogen oxide, dioxins, particulates, and acid rain. And the amount of fuel you're using is the equivalent of a 550-mile car trip. So that's, we already know we're no longer calling it climate change, we're calling it climate crisis. So this is contributing, unfortunately, to that as well. But there is a different way. green burial. So let's go ahead and start by me defining what green burial is for you. It's essentially an earth-friendly way of doing burial. So what does that mean? No embalming. Embalming is not allowed. We are a certified green cemetery. There's a nonprofit called the Green Burial Council, and we are literally not allowed to have an embalmed body. Graves are dug by hand, and they're much more shallow. So we dig graves 3 feet deep, which might sound, but that's right here. It's quite deep, trust me. You can see me standing in a grave, so you can see. Don't I look so happy digging that grave? And we have a very specific way in which we dig the grave. You can see in that bottom right picture that there's 3 piles. We do that so that we can put the topsoil in its own pile. The next sort of 6 to 12 inches goes into its own pile, and then you have this massive, the rest of it. We do that so that when we close the grave, the earth goes back into its original layer. And that's very important for any gardeners here. You know the topsoil is where all those beneficial microorganisms live. That's where that seed bank is, the root mass. If you want plants to grow again, you need the topsoil back on the top. In a green cemetery, we are not allowed to have burial vaults or liners, nor would we want to. We want it to be natural. We don't want perfectly manicured lawns. That's not what we're going after. And again, we don't want to be putting concrete into the earth. Anything that a person is buried in has to be biodegradable. So on the left is an example of a shroud, which is just a simple piece of fabric that's wrapped around the person. In this case, it would be all natural fibers. So no synthetic fibers, cotton, linen, wool, silk, hemp. And then caskets would also be biodegradable. So it could be a pine casket, a willow casket, a hand-woven casket. There's a lot of, actually, surprisingly, a lot of options for green burial in terms of what you can be buried in. And even though cremation has the effect that it does, we still do burial of cremated remains because there's a lot of factors as to why we choose what we want to do with our body after death. Some people are terrified of being buried. It's psychological, just as some people are terrified of the idea of being burned. And there's money, and there's family tradition, and religious practices, etc. So cremated remains are naturally salty and alkaline, and they do damage plants. They are harmful to plants. If you were to bury cremated remains just as they are, and if a plant was to grow nearby, the roots would literally avoid the cremated remains because they're so alkaline and so salty. So when we do a burial of cremated remains, we actually mix it with an amendment that helps to neutralize the pH and make it safer for plants. In a green cemetery, you can still have stones, but they're natural stones that lie flat on the ground. And they can still be engraved, as you can see here. So why green burial? Why would somebody potentially choose this? It's about 1/2 to 1/3 the cost of a conventional burial. So just straight up money, cost less. It's simple. It's very simple, and a lot of people find that appealing. As you can see here, simple caskets, simple, out in nature. And my God, is it beautiful, seriously, it's very beautiful. Both aesthetically and the actual burial itself, and we'll go into that more. And as you're already learning, it's earth-friendly. It's designed to be very intentional and very thoughtful about what we do, what we put in the earth, how we dig the graves, everything that we do to have the most minimal harmful impact possible. And one of the most important things, in my opinion, about natural burial or green burial is that it enables and empowers people to be hands-on in the burial of their loved ones. The community, the family, the friends, they are doing it. They're not turning it over to a professional to do it. They are getting to be hands-on in that process. And it reminds us how much death is a natural part of life. When you're at a burial surrounded by trees and the sound of the wind and the sound of the birds, death is a natural part of life. It just is. And we've been so removed from it. To have this experience, it helps remind us of that connection, which is super important to remember. Let's see if I have time to show you a quick little video. I do. So I'm just going to show you, just for folks who are local, just a little video about Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. Carolina Memorial Sanctuary provides eco-friendly natural burials. Simple, economical, beautiful, and environmentally friendly. Preserve, protect, and renew the land with your burial. Reduce carbon footprint and contribute to the natural ecocycle. Honor the forgotten old ways. Protect and restore wildlife habitat. Return to the beauty of the land. A resting place in nature. Pets have a resting place too. Meadows, creekside, woodlands. A sanctuary open to the public with walking trails for you, your loved ones, and pets. I'm actually going to stop it because I want to be mindful of time, but you got an impression, that's all you needed. So you heard me, we've been talking about natural burial, green burial. I mentioned that we are a specific type of green cemetery known as a conservation burial ground. So what does that mean? What is conservation burial? Really, what it means is that we're doing 100% natural burial, so everything we just talked about. But in addition to that, the land is actually a conservation site. So we work with a land trust. In our case, we work with Conserving Carolina. They've helped us receive grants. They have volunteers come out and help us. We actually donated our conservation easement to them. So this is an important part of being a conservation burial ground, is the whole property is legally protected with a conservation easement, which dictates it can only ever be a conservation burial ground in perpetuity. So I'm not going to be alive forever. In 30 years, someone else running the sanctuary can't decide to change it into something else. It is legally protected. So much of what we do has to go with the care of the land. So we have land stewards, and they do a lot of work restoring and protecting wildlife. We use low-impact vehicles. Cars are literally not allowed to be on the property, so we use golf carts to get around. There's much lower burial density. What does that mean? At a conventional cemetery, as you know, they're trying to get as many people in as possible. You're going to be right next to somebody whether you know them or not. In conservation burial, we know that even digging a grave creates land disturbance. So we are only allowed to do 300 burials per acre. Like, you're not going to be right next to somebody unless you want to be. And a lot of our efforts have to do with removing invasives so that native plants can thrive. And it's a community green space, so conservation burial grounds are intentionally created as a place for the community to come and go on a walk and go birding and just anything else that you would do at any other park. We have trails that's open to the public. And one of the most important things is this is wildlife protection. If you come and walk around, this is a sanctuary for all of the animals and plants that are there. We are helping keep this a protected place for them. So I'm going to share with you the very first woman who was ever buried with us to really help you understand this. Pictures, as we all know, can convey so much more than my words. So Kathy Jennings, the first woman ever buried with us, she chose to have a home funeral. And maybe you haven't heard of a home funeral, but you've probably heard of a home birth. As you know, people can choose to birth their child in their home. This is also available, and it's known as a home funeral. What that means is that we have the legal right to care for our loved ones in our home. In the state of North Carolina, you can literally do everything yourself without the involvement of a funeral home. It's 100% legal. It's actually legal in every single state. 9 states require the involvement of a funeral home. North Carolina is not one of those states. So her family elected to do a home funeral. And what that means is it was an opportunity for the community to come and her family to come and tend to her body and lovingly just say goodbye. They had an altar set up for her. People could just come in as they want with just mindful silence, come in and just be with her. This is her daughter. So we all know that death is so surreal. It's very weird, right? Even when we know it's expected, it's still a lot to wrap your mind around. And so it gives loved ones a chance to say goodbye and just kind of like be there. And it sounds weird at first, because again, we live in a culture where death is very removed from us. But the thing that's so interesting about it is even people who are experiencing it for the first time are shocked at how natural it feels. Because it is, it's very natural. So here are our loved ones gathered around her. You can see they've decorated her shroud with flowers. And this is them preparing to bring her to Carolina Memorial Sanctuary the day of her burial. This is them leaving the house, and what you're about to see is all of their community. Can you imagine all these people who loved her just experiencing something that probably most of them have never experienced before? But they're all there witnessing this and participating in this. This is still at their property, and it is legal if you're doing a home funeral to transport a body. So they put her in the Subaru hatchback. No funeral home needed. Here they are at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, and this has not happened a lot. This has maybe happened, we've done today, I think around 177 human burials, I want to say, 60 pet burials, and I think it's only happened maybe 5 times where the family has chosen to literally physically carry their loved one from the parking lot to the grave, and that's what they did. And so here we are at the grave site, and what's so different here is that it's not a funeral director that is leading this experience. It's somebody who's usually intimate with the family. It's a friend, it's a family member, if someone's religious or spiritual. In this case, they had their friend slash like spiritual leader. I don't know if they'd call him a leader, but somebody who was part of their faith community doing the graveside service. So we start with the graveside service. And this little girl was amazing. I'll tell you a little story really quickly about this little girl. We had a little red shovel, and she was with us the whole time, helping close the grave. She enjoyed the experience so much that we gave her that red shovel. So a lot of times, and you may have had this experience yourself, people are really afraid of what is this going to be like for children. If we have a home funeral and we invite kids there, is that going to be traumatic for them? If we have a green burial and the body's lying out there in a shroud, is that going to be traumatic for them? The way we feel about death is taught to us by our culture. We are not innately terrified of death, and a lot of times we are projecting our own fear onto children. And the best thing you can do is just ask them, do they want to be there? And I've been at almost every burial that we've had, and I can tell you that children just add this beauty to it because they don't have those preconceived notions about death yet. And there's just a lightness and a jubilation, and they enjoy helping, and they enjoy being there. And it's actually a beautiful, beautiful way for us to model for them a different way of doing death. So then after the graveside service, we invite folks, if they want to help lower their loved one into the grave. It's always an invitation. Our staff is totally equipped to do it ourselves with volunteers, but almost always people want to help. So in this case, her husband is on the right, and the friend slash person of their faith community is there on the left. And you can see them receiving her and then lowering her gently into the grave. After that, we invite everyone who's present to put 3 scoops of earth into the grave. We demonstrate how that's done, and again, this is just an invitation. And this is her husband, as you can see, placing earth into the grave. And that's her daughter. And the closing of the grave, so after everyone's done their 3 scoops, we then invite people to help us fully close the grave. And even if they're not able to physically do it, or they just don't want to, witnessing it is still incredibly powerful. Because again, when you've just lost somebody, it is surreal. It's weird. It's weird in that they were here and now they're not. And being able to see this process, it helps to integrate it. It helps to make it real. And as we get to this stage of the burial, you can literally feel everything shift. So once the grave has been fully closed, we then invite everyone who's present to help us decorate the grave. We always encourage people to bring fresh flowers, as you can see that we've done here. And after that, I walk away. You don't need me anymore. I invite the family to stay as long as they want to so they can have that intimacy and privacy to themselves. The term natural burial, those are new terms, but this practice is ancient. This is the way that the majority of the world still does burial. This is the way we did burial up until the Civil War. I mean, it took some time for it to catch on. This is not a new practice. This is an ancient practice. And that's it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Laswell, and I am the owner of Moss and Thistle Farm Natural Casket Company. I'm just over the mountain in Lake Lure, and I weave willow caskets. So I'm going to mostly just show you guys some pictures and tell some stories. Oh, can you hear me okay? Okay, sorry about that. I'm just going to show you some pictures about what I do and talk about some of the other local casket makers in North Carolina and what's special about working with a casket maker, or what I think is special. So this is my farm. Like I said, I'm just over the mountain. I'm about 35 minutes from here, and it's 22 acres, and I grow cut flowers and basketry willow. And it is an old family farm, and I've been there, not my family, I bought it from somebody else's family. But we've spent the last 7 years bringing it back to life, getting rid of the kudzu, and finding some way that this farm can support our family. And so willow caskets. I started growing basketry willow in 2019 as part of our land restoration to secure some erosion that was happening and stabilize the soil. And so I did that by growing willow. And through learning about basketry willow, I learned about willow caskets and absolutely fell in love with them. I thought it was one of the most beautiful and warm and calming things I had ever seen. And so I started to look into it, see how one gets such a thing, and I found out that they are actually quite rare, and there aren't a lot of people in America that make these. In fact, at the time there were 2, and I became number 3. Right now we are at 5, and we hope to keep growing. But when I say I am your local casket weaver, that makes it sound like there are, everybody has one, but you're one of 5 communities that has one in the country. And so I am not the only casket maker, however. I'm going to show you a little bit about my caskets, but then I also want to talk about some of the other caskets that you can find people that will actually make and invite you to help make them with you. And that are suitable for green burial. So obviously my caskets are biodegradable, and they are one of the kinds of caskets you can use at a place like Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. However, you can be buried in a natural handmade casket in any cemetery. It is the law that you can bring any casket you wish to any funeral home, and they do have to accept it. And so even if you are going to a conventional burial, if you do choose to work with a local casket maker, you're able to do that no matter what. So these are just a few more of my caskets. Some of them have wood. This is a poplar top and a pine base, and that one has a poplar top as well. And the one on the top left is all willow. The insides are also completely natural and biodegradable. They have little mattresses that are made with hay from my hay meadow or wood shavings from the wood shop, as well as a natural cotton liner. And I also invite people to bring any of their family fabrics. If you have a quilt or a family piece of fabric that you want to integrate, create your own bedding, you can give it to me and I'll sew it into something we can use inside your casket or your shroud, because I also do make burial trays to carry shrouded bodies as well. And I grow willow, like I said, so this was just a few pictures of what willow looks like when it's growing. It's an extremely sustainable product. It's managed through an old forestry technique called coppicing, which has kind of fallen out of fashion. But in coppicing, you cut the plant to the ground every single year and it completely regrows. So every year, my willow plants give me 20 to 30 weaving rods off each one. And that's year after year after year for up to 30 years. And it's an extremely easy plant to grow. It doesn't take fertilizer. I don't have to use pesticides. I use some, just basic organic growing techniques to keep it healthy and strong. But in terms of friendly for the environment, it's an amazing, amazing product. It is so completely sustainable. And just a little, when you support local businesses often also support other local businesses. And so the willow that I cannot yet grow myself, I buy from other small farmers. So this is actually a picture of my son harvesting last winter up in West Virginia at our friend Abby's farm. And I think that's just another beautiful thing. When you do support a local maker, you're actually probably supporting 3 or 4 other families as well, because most of us do tend to source our materials from local mills, local growers, local textile factories. And so it really just passes it on. And so Abby here in the top right, just a plug for Abby. This was her retirement project. She retired 2 years ago and decided to plant up 5 acres of willow. And so this is her and her husband Bug. This is their business that is going to take them through their retirement. And then the bottom picture here, this is what basketry willow looks like when the leaves have all fallen off. So this is what we harvest in the winter, straight up to these little rods that my son has. In the summertime, it looks like what it looks like behind Abby there. Beautiful Wind in the Willows, just like a book. Okay, so other North Carolina casket makers. So I've featured 2 here. Alder Grove Woodworks makes beautiful alder, poplar, and pine wooden caskets in his workshop. And Green Men Caskets makes these really interesting wooden caskets that are covered in bark. And I put a picture of her there so you can see it is a woman casket maker. These are quite rare as well. We don't have a lot of women wooden casket makers. All of us willow weavers are women at this point. But in the wooden casket world, a woman woodworker is actually quite rare. So we have her here in Troutman, North Carolina, and Judd is in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And the nice thing when you work with a local casket maker, you call up an actual person, you talk to them on the phone, you can talk to them about what you might want inside, what you might want it to look on the outside. You can often come help be part of the process. And so that specific element of it was one of the things that made me want to do this the most. When I just kind of imagined what that would be like to be able to participate in making a casket for one of my people, that just seemed like one of the most healing experiences I could imagine, and I wanted to be able to offer that to other people. So, one last thing about local casket makers. So this is the Funerary Artisans Collective. It was a group of us that got together in the spring and put together a website to help people find casket makers in their area. So we have an interactive map, and if you're it's a small picture, you can see the eastern side of the country is more heavily represented by local casket makers, which is great news for us. But if you know anybody in the Southwest that wants a great career, they need some folks. And I put over here on the right, these are 2 more North Carolina casket companies. Shrouded House does linen shrouds, and Bury Me Naturally has cardboard caskets that you saw on Caskie's presentation, the cardboard caskets there. So you can go to this website and tell your friends, put in your location, find somebody to work with. There are so many amazing options, and not just caskets and shrouds. There are burial quilts, there are urns, there are all kinds of beautiful ways that you can involve local makers in your memorials. So, weaving together. So like I said, being able to involve people in the process, either of making their own casket or the casket of a loved one, is something that really spoke to me about being able to do this. And This is Jack and Nancy. These were the first folks to come and weave with me for the completed process. They wove Jack's casket, Nancy's urn, and a casket for their dog, Pal, as well. And all three of them will be buried at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. And so Jack and Nancy came and spent a week with me, and they did almost everything themselves. You can see Nancy on the right here with her urn. And there, up here on the left, that's actually a picture out of a video. I'm not technologically talented enough. The video that is from, Nancy's laughing, and she says, "What are these people going to think? Why is she smiling while weaving a casket?" And I think that sums it up beautifully, because this was an incredibly meaningful, fun, touching week for everyone. And then the picture in the bottom left here, that's Jack's casket with his grandmother's quilt. And we found a fabric for the lining that would bring out that perfect blue from the quilt. And he now has it at the foot of his bed as a end-of-the-bed basket for blankets, and he's just using it for storage until he needs it. And Nancy has her urn next to her chair, and she keeps her remote control and her phone in it. And I'm not sure what they're doing with Pal's casket. But Pal is 14, and so he spent the week with us as well, actually. He actually stayed at my house, and I have a great picture of Jack weaving Pal's casket with Pal sleeping on his feet. And so it's amazing. Personal touches. So for those that don't want to come and actually be part of the weaving, there are also other ways that you can make things special. So on the left here, this was actually the first casket I ever did for another person at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, and she was looking for a way that she could use her casket in her home. She wanted to be able to enjoy it. She didn't need a basket, she didn't need a coffee table, and so she said, "How about a bookcase?" So we wove removable shelves, and she has it in her den with her most special things on it. The lid it attaches to the back, so the lid is hidden on the back there. And then her daughters came out and worked with me to find out how they would convert it into a casket when it was time to use it as a casket. So I've gotten to know their whole family, and we still keep in touch, and they still come visit. It's really neat. And then on the right, this was a family who was not planning ahead with as much time. Their mother was passing, and their children and granddaughter and sister came out and helped me finish weaving the lid. And then I gave them my burning tool, and they burned symbols into the wooden base of things that their mother loved, so sea turtles. She loved the ocean, and so that's a picture of her casket at her burial, and they put family fabrics, and I think they had a starfish on top and other beach-related things that represented her to them. And so this is my personal story. Up until June, this had been something that was very moving. I met beautiful, incredible people. I've been having amazing experiences, but I had not actually buried someone that I loved in a green burial. And in June, my farm assistant, she died unexpectedly. And so we had not only a home funeral, but also a home burial for her. And we buried her in one of my caskets, which is the one here on the bottom left. And we shrouded her in wool because she loved sheep. And her family also has a flower farm, so we filled her casket with flowers. And then we buried her in the pasture above her sheep, where her sheep live. And so this was Isabella's village. And just like Cassie was saying about the community coming together, to be able to do this for someone you love is incredibly moving, it's incredibly special, but at the same time, it felt the entire time like that was the way that things should be. It didn't feel different or odd, it just felt so right. Even something that was extremely shocking and traumatic and unexpected, Isabella was 21 years old. We were able to do this for her, and it made it feel beautiful, and like it represented her, and it was something that we could do for her. And so, like Cassie was saying with the gender roles, it was funny because we did kind of fall into our gender roles. The women washed her body and shrouded her, the men dug the grave, broke it a little bit because I was the casket maker. And we brought her up to the top of the pasture on the back of an old vintage truck that she had loved that belonged to a neighbor. And you can see her dog walked up with us, and he stood by the entire time. And just like Cassie was saying, the children jumped right in. They seemed to know that the little shovels were for them, and they pitched in and helped. Everybody pitched in and helped. And the fact that we could do everything ourselves and say goodbye in that way it's something we talk about whenever we get together, which is every couple weeks. We talk about this experience and the fact that we were able to do this and how much it meant to us. So that is that. And so I am also here because of Ursula. Ursula found me and came to me to help build or weave her burial tray with her very special group of death doulas. So we're now going to invite them all to the stage and walk through our experience weaving her carrier together. So Ursula, Genevieve, Heidi, and Allison, if you would like to come on up. Actually, we're not showing the right one. That's odd. Here, why don't you do that, and I'm just going to mess with this for a second. Yeah.
Hi everybody again. I had talked about that because of articles in our highlights, there was more interest in the community about what we just have heard and what things are done these days. But in the meantime, I had also considered my own funeral ideas and what I might want to do when time comes for me. And I had told some people that I was interested in creating, weaving my own casket. And the kind of normal reaction was, what's the matter? You lost weight. Are you dying? And no, I did lose weight, but I'm not dying. But I was in a place of grief, and that reminded me of the time when I had lost my loved ones and the pain, and that I actually had never been able to go through the process of grieving with my own family. My father, my mother, my husband, they all died when I was far away. As a child, my father came back from the war, and the only way he could free himself from the trauma that he had experienced was by killing himself, and he was found only about 8 months later. My mother, of course, became quite depressed, and later in life, when I had settled here in America and I was waiting for her to join us here, she already had tickets. She was in Holland for the first time really in her life, quite settled and quite happy. The tickets were on her table while my family traveled the country and was expected back to pick her up from the airport in about 8 days. Well, before that time came, and on the way home, I called home to my friend and said, we will be there in about a week. And she said, Ursula, we have been looking for you everywhere. The police is trying to find you. Your mom died. Of course, I was here, she was in Holland. And of course, she was already buried by the time I would even make it over there. My husband was ill, but there was really not to be anticipated death within the next year or something, but we knew that his time might be coming and he might need care. And since I had been in Thailand with my son and we both had been spending months in Thailand and we loved it, I said, I would like to go one more time to Thailand. I just love it there. My son and I are avid divers and he took me down to 130 feet and I mean, I just love the country and I love being there. And so we arranged for him to go to a family reunion, 200 some people in Kentucky with his 3 children. So I knew he was not going to be by himself. Prepared his suitcase and everything and said, well, I see you when I come back. It didn't quite turn out that way. After about 14 days, I don't quite remember how long I had been in Thailand, I get a phone call and his son said, Dad had died. And so it was kind of a beautiful death for him. He's from Kentucky. He loved to take the kids into the caves over there. So at the end of the family reunion, they had decided to all go down together to the caves one more time. And down there in the caves, he died in the arm of his children. Kind of a wonderful death for him and his children, or a goodbye for him and his children. Pretty horrible for me to get a phone call in Thailand. And there are practical things to be done, like death certificates, and he had to be cremated before I would be home. And so I did not have an opportunity to say, like those people who died in COVID, I love you. Seeing them, being with them, I love you, goodbye. Go on your journey. So that's my relationship with death. And again, events like 9/11 bring out in me the pain of all those people who perish suddenly without being able to say goodbye, and the pain of those who are left behind. So after 9/11, I created some sculptures, and they were shown in New York in an exhibition called Faces of Grief and Healing. There were 13 international artists who showed this. One lady had encasted the amount of people who died in the towers in little, not corn, rice, had encased them in rice, and she had a beautiful bowl there, and there were all these encased rice pieces in, and people said, well, aren't you worried that somebody will take them? Well, I'm getting a little bit off the track here, but it was a wonderful exhibition where people really were able to, through their art and to sharing it with the public, showed both sides. The face of grieving and the things we can do to heal. Let's see how I get back to my notes here. So I wasn't a stranger to these kind of experiences, but I did want something else for my children. We don't know when we die. It might come suddenly and then nothing can happen, and we can prepare quite well for the practical side of it. So I had already purchased a plot at Carolina Memorial. But then I thought about, well, I'm living here by myself, how kids are far away, my son is in Thailand. How do I get there? How is it actually going to be handled? And talking to one of my sons about it, without missing a beat, he said, No problem, Mom. I just roll you into your favorite blanket, put you on the truck, take you over there, and gently lay you into the ground. Well, that was kind of cute, you know, but the kid lives in Thailand, and I had my experience with what you do when you get a notice that somebody dies in Thailand. You don't just get on the plane and be here in 15 minutes. So that wasn't going to work. So that made me think about what else can be done and who would be there to take care of me. And what is it really taking in a green burial? What needs to be there to make it a green burial? So I did some research, and I found that there was a young lady nearby who waves caskets out of willows. As you have heard from Sarah, she invites people to participate. So I made an appointment, visited, and fell in love with her and her farm. It was just such a healing experience just to go there. Everything is free range, from the goats to the chicken to there's a pig, and it just is, and it's all very natural and very wonderfully healing. And I grew up in a setting like this, so it was very wonderful and healing for me. But when I told my friends about, well, actually now my doulas, that I had found this lady, and I didn't even have to ask them, can I come along, can I come along? So that's how we got started, deciding to weave together a casket for me. And we set a date, we went over there. Yes, that makes me smile, as you can see. By the way, they're now my best doulas. They all promised that they would stick with me. And when my time came, they didn't have to promise. We now are kind of a club. Okay, my notes. Sarah is a dear friend by now, and she hosted us for 3 days of weaving. Well, us and some other family members and some animals and stuff. And you will see all about it in the slideshow that they will be presenting. Heidi, Allison, Genevieve, Sarah, your time to guide these folks through creating Ursula's coffin. They call it a tray. And after they've finished, we will uncover it.
This slide captures multiple memories for me. Our time together on such a project naturally brought visitors. If you've read Rumi's poem, Guest House, and he speaks of the joys and the sorrows and the delight that comes to visit. There will be few pictures of the tender moments and our sorrows, but we did welcome all the visitors that came in this process. We had 3 days to be with this. You will see jolly moments, I promise. But the gift that I take from this experience is a new way for me to think of the end-of-life process, both for myself and my loved ones. But I think I'm learning that it's also changing how I process my day-to-day life. So, thank you.
It fits, see? They did measurements.
So in this picture, we got the base on the left, and is it on?
Should have a green one.
All right, is that better? Okay, so on the left is the base that we have not quite finished at that point. We were just measuring it to make sure it would fit. And on the right, I've put in the uprights. So these are going to make the sides of the carrier, and it's weighted down to keep it in place because as you can see, the rods do tend to get pretty big, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. So the weights keep it held down for us. Yeah. And so now the sides are being built, little by little, row by row. And everybody jumped right in and were naturals. And at this point, we're putting in the handles. And Ursula was very involved at every stage of the design of every curve, of the colors of the bands, how the handles would come together, how they would feel in the hand. When I see this now, it's just all Ursula.
I love that one.
Okay, so in this picture we have my mom, and she's petting Strider, the dog, and then there's Cy. You see Cy, he was 3 years old almost, and so it was just wonderful to have so many generations or so many decades of people together. So Ursula brought us together in May. We were together, and the container for us was the farm. The container we were building was Ursula's tray. And they mentioned a little bit about the goats and the chickens and the ducks that greeted us. But it was just all of that space that was created for this event to give us time, 3 days, to laugh, to contemplate, to weave, and to feel the interdependent web of life through our being together. We've all heard it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a village to death a person. And we were becoming a village, and we're just part of the village. In August, we met at my house for a meeting for this event, and my mother, who is there, joined us for a little while, and it turns out that we were nesting her death, and that was, like I said, in August, and on September 4, she took her last breath. And because of this experience for me, I'm sure I've done it a little differently than I would have. I stayed with my mom, I washed my mom, and I put the shroud on her. I was so excited when I realized I could put the shroud on, and it just felt good to do. There you go. Oh, no, that's not all. So then...
I love you.
Yeah, thank you. I love you too. So I called Ursula, and I invited a couple people to come over after she passed. Well, Ursula came before she passed. We had family. We sang to her all week. I even sang with her breath as she was slowing down. It was my own idea. Yeah, it was so cool. Anyway, so Ursula came and visited her that week as she was passing, and after she took her last breath, and I washed her and put her favorite hat on and her favorite slippers, and she was wearing the t-shirt from the 70s that said, "I survived the Loch Ness Monster," which was a roller coaster. And it just seemed so fabulous. So just these little details. So anyway, I called Ursula and she said, "I'm coming right over." And she stood with me, and we looked at Mom, and I hugged her more, and
May I say something?
yes. And let me just finish, though. Then you say something. And sat with Mom until the people came to transport her, and like I said, I put the shroud, helped put the shroud on, and I whistled. I used a whistle in the room. It just felt right. So I was given permission, by the way, by this whole process to be with my mom. And there we have it. Now, Ursula.
No, okay. I do like to share this because I had told you that I had not been able to be with one of my beloved ones, and definitely not with my mother. So knowing Heidi and have known Marie through this process, and she was married in Heidelberg in Germany, so we were talking German and we were having a good time. And when the time came that Heidi just shared with you, she was, I don't want to say she was kind, because it was just natural for me to be there. And there was a daughter who was with her mother and did to her mother and with her mother what I think many of us would love to do for ourselves and each other. So Heidi, and through this process of what we started, I have been given a great gift. I was there with a daughter and a mother who did it right.
Okay. So this is just continuing on. The slides are getting taller.
This is a video that captures some of the joy and merriment that we had. With Brandy when she comes, she'll be toasting with Brandy when she comes. She'll be toasting with Brandy, she'll be toasting with Brandy, she'll be toasting with Brandy when she comes. Oh no. Oh, there we go.
Okay, and so I think in that song and then in this, this is the very final step, turning down the border.
And then this is a video of the turning down.
So the last two sticks going down. And here we have the final carrier. And when I see this picture, it reminds me of a thought I had many times during the 3 days, which was that as much fun as we were having and feasting and singing, that there will come a day that we're going to be saying goodbye to our friend, and that ultimately that was why we were there, was to help prepare her and us for that day. And I would feel so thankful that when that time comes, that we will remember these days and have these memories and the laughter and the joy, and also that we'll know that Ursula loved this carrier, that she touched every stick in it, that she helped
My last piece
design
of
it.
art.
Yes. And that we will be tucking her back into the earth in the way that she wanted to be. And I can only hope that when that day comes, that that is going to help us to be able to say goodbye.
These are photos of my son, Sai. He's 3, playing in the burial tray. And it was really a beautiful experience to see to have a child there
who didn't really know what was going on, was just like, oh, this is an object, this is fun to like play around in. And so Ursula's burial tray is infused with child's laughter and singing and sorrows and joys and toasting brandy and all sorts of wonderful things. It's all there for her. And it wasn't the first time that Sai's sort of been a little helper in someone's process with death. With my grandmother, who died here at Highland Farms a couple of years ago, he was almost 3 months old, and she was on her way out, and he was on his way in. And it was very beautiful, and he took lots of naps. They took lots of naps together. And so I think that having that I was able to be there at my grandmother's death, and it was much less scary than I thought it would be. It felt natural and beautiful and safe, and my mother and I were singing to her as she died, and I think that, and Sai was a great comfort to her, and I think having that experience with death, when Ursula asked me to be one of her death doulas, I didn't feel scared or intimidated or worried about it. I felt like, yes, I would love to do that. That's, this is part of life, and my hope and the gift that she has given me and my family is to be able to have a fuller picture of the cycle of life, not just celebrating birth and being alive, but also having ritual and meaningful, just meaning in place for death as well, and being really intentional and present with it. And I'm just very grateful to Ursula for that gift, and to pass on that new way for me, because I grew up sort of being scared of death, to pass on a different way to my children. So thank you, Ursula. And then this is a video of Sai and Genevieve being silly. Oh, I guess I don't have to do that.
We can do. Bit that boo.
And this is the finished tray.
Which we now can show to you all. Are we at this place? You want to help me, my doulas? There it is. Thank you, me ladies. There isn't really anything else that I want to say right now, but sometimes the universe takes and sometimes the universe gives, and it has given me these people when I needed them most. Thank you. Thank you. This is the voice of reason in my ear.
I said, let's snack. But also, oh, you could say.
I don't really have anything else to say. I think that's not true.
We said we were going to open it up for questions and.
No, you don't. I have my own speech right now. We don't. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you all, to the audience, that you came here, that you have supported me here in this community. And thank you very much for all these smiling faces that are supporting me tonight. And I hope that what you have seen here, all the practical aspects and all those things and the joy, that you help us to go out in the community and create more opportunities like this. So people even here at Highland Farms don't have to die all by themselves. You know, we can have a group of people that are there for each other when there are no others around. So that's what I like to give to all of you to help us to achieve. And now comes the time where Genevieve likes for me to say, we break now and we will have some refreshments and you can ask us all the questions you want to ask.
Do you want to do any Q&A up here in case there's like common questions?
Yes. Yes.
Let's just take a little bit of time. If there's no questions, that's fine. But if there are questions, does anyone? Yes.
Where do you keep this?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Now, good question. Not in my living room, but Sarah will keep it on her farm, in her barn, and it will be there. And when time comes, this lady will get it out of the barn and get me into it.
Any other questions?
Cassie, I bought my plot, but I wanted to know if there might be a way to transmit this to my children so they'll see the presentation you gave us.
Is it being recorded, this presentation?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I would like my children to see this.
Yeah, got it right here.
So the presentation is being filmed.
How do we
Yes.
get
If
a
anybody wants to
copy?
share it with others, or if there are folks that wanted to be here but couldn't be here.
Maybe I'll put it on YouTube or something.
Any other questions? Yes?
Give you my
We are interested in your establishment. We've been there, but did not have any guidance. And I wondered if there was sufficient interest here, if we could have a group come and then we can take us around.
Yeah, so there's two things. We do organize group tours. So if there's enough folks here interested and you want to come out together, you can do a group tour of Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. We also offer individual tours. So for anybody who's interested in this, one of the most important things is to come out to the land. See if it speaks to you, see if it resonates with you. So you can book an appointment for a guided tour. We drive you around the golf cart, tell you more about our project, answer all your questions. And then when folks are like, yes, this is the right place, you meet with me to actually pick your spot, as several folks here will tell you. So that's the process if you're interested. And on our website is everything you could want to know, prices, like more about green burial. You can book an appointment for an individual tour on our website as well.
What's your website?
If you just do a search for our name, I didn't see but CarolinaMemorialSanctuary.org. If you just do a search for Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, if you forget our name, if you do green burial, Asheville will pop up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. This is going to be quite a contrast to what we're going to see in the news with the death of the Queen.
Yeah.
What a contrast.
Yeah.
It's an honor in different ways. Thank you very much. I was wondering, are there other places in North Carolina?
There are. So there's only right now, I think, 15 certified conservation burial grounds in the United States. There's a new one that just opened up in the Durham area. So if you know folks out east, but if you have relatives, friends you think might be interested in this, but they don't live here, there's a nonprofit called the Green Burial Council, and they have a list of green cemeteries organized by state. So every state has some type of green cemetery, because there's a hybrid cemetery, which is a conventional cemetery that has a section set aside for green burial. We actually have 2 of those in Asheville. There's a natural burial ground, which is a cemetery that is 100% green burial, and then there's a conservation burial ground, which is what we are. And so you can find that on the Green Burial Council website. Any other? Yeah.
Tell me about these death doulas. Do they come with?
So this is actually, yeah, so we are really lucky. Asheville and the surrounding area has a very vibrant and passionate community of folks who are really interested in end-of-life and death care. So there's a lot of death doulas in Asheville, and again, around this area. What a death doula is it's somebody who companions with you as you're going through the dying process. And they can serve so many different roles. It can be quite functional. They're just helping you get all of your end-of-life stuff together and organized. It could just be having companionship, someone there that's acting as an intermediary between maybe you and your family and you and your friends. But we're very lucky. We have all of these things in this area. We also have what's known as a home funeral guide / death midwife. And that's somebody who's trained on how to care for the body after death. So if you want that experience in your own home, you could have a home funeral guide come and help to guide that process. So if you just do a search, there is a website, but again, if you do like Death Doula Asheville, there's a whole directory. There's a website that shows you a whole directory of local death doulas. So we're really lucky. We have lots of support here for this. I mean, we have one of 5 casket weavers, right here in our backyard. So,
And Cassie, I bought our last Best Act, Mallory McDuff, as a professor at Warren Wilson, and I would recommend this book. She explains the poisons that are shot into the air when you're cremated. It convinced me.
it's a great book. If this is something you're even like quasi interested in, I really recommend it. It just helps you kind of really understand the different options, and it's her going through her own process of deciding what she wanted for her body. She's an environmental studies teacher at Warren Wilson. It's called Our Last Best Act. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for being patient and being with us for several hours at this point. And I think we have, did you say we have refreshments? What's next? I don't even know what's next.
I don't know if you know, yes, we do have refreshments. We have vegetables, and we have cookies, and we have something to drink, and please do help yourself, and if you want to take some home, you just... Thank you for coming again.
Is there brandy?
Brandy.
Brandy?
I have it there.
I'm kidding.